Glenn is a useless nerd who decided to open a clinic after the war between humans and monsters ended. This led to him working as a doctor along with his hot snake girl assistant. He now spends his day focusing on treating female monsters and enjoys doing Riz things with them. The scene opens up with Glenn enjoying the talents of a cowgirl. After not finding lumps on her, he moves towards her ears and starts rubbing them. This makes the cowgirl excited and she makes some happy noises to prove her enjoyment. After the inspection is complete, Glenn smiles at her and informs her that she is expecting a baby. The huge buffalo husband comes running and hugs the cowgirl. At the same time, Saphantite arrives with a bouquet of flowers and congratulates the couple. Glenn informs them that the pain she is feeling will slowly go away and asks Saphantite to give her some herbs as medicine. Finally, the clinic is closed and Glenn notices that Saphantite is acting differently. After being asked about it, Saphantite tells Glenn that she doesn't appreciate him enjoying a married cowgirl and forcing her to make all kinds of noises. However, this is not the main issue that is bothering her, as the thing she wants the most is for Glenn to call her Safi instead of Saphantite. He agrees and her mood quickly improves. Afterward, a male monster arrives and delivers a letter to Glenn. The letter is from the Central Hospital, specifically from Dr. C. Thulhi. The next day, the two of them head out to the arena as Dr. C. Thulhi needs someone to inspect the players. Saphantite thinks that the doctor is being selfish because they have to close the clinic in order to visit the arena. Glenn informs Saphantite that Dr. C. Thulhi helped him a lot and gave his clinic her backing, which made it easier for him to keep the clinic in business. The delusional doctor thinks that Dr. C. Thulhi arranged this so he can improve more and experience new things. Saphantite pities his innocent soul and informs him that the fighters they will be seeing are mid-level to 3rd and 4th rank fighters. The centaur driver helps them with the luggage and requests Glenn to do everything he can for the princess. Hearing him say the princess confuses Glenn for a bit, but he dismisses it and moves inside the arena. Once inside, a 3rd rank fighter called Tazalia greets them along with some other centaurs and monsters. Glenn introduces himself as the doctor who came instead of Dr. C. Thulhi. The monsters start commenting on the fact that the human boy looks younger than expected. However, Tazalia orders them to shut up and wait for their turn to get examined. Looking at her boss around the monster makes Saphantite curious, and she asks if Tazalia is the one who is responsible for directing them. Tazalia agrees and shows them the logo on her armor. However, Glenn's eyes don't notice the logo and start to admire something else. Tazalia notices him glaring at her and informs him that it is very common for males to lose their focus when looking at a beauty like her. Afterward, Tazalia informs them that she is the sole heiress of Scythia Transportation, which dominates the transportation industry in their city. This makes Glenn realize why the driver called Tazalia a princess earlier. Later, the inspection starts and the first patient is a cat girl. Glenn notices some inflammation and suggests that she should rest for a while. However, she refuses as there is an important match the following week with a chance of promotion on the line. The cat girl starts getting close and personal with the doctor, forcing him to work his magic and fix her. Saphantite doesn't like her behavior and uses her tail to bring the cat girl towards herself. The next patient is the one and only Tazalia. The first question she asks Glenn is if he likes centaurs like herself. Tazalia continues to explain that one day she will be the head of Scythia Transportation and also lead all the centaurs of Lindworm. Unluckily, before any of that can happen, she is expected to get married. According to Tazalia, a young and intelligent doctor who spends his time treating monsters is a perfect candidate to become her future husband. Saphantite doesn't like what she's hearing and wraps her tail around Tazalia, mocking her that she has gotten fat. An argument between the two of them begins, which leads to Saphantite measuring her actual waist. However, she still stands by the statement that Tazalia has gotten fat. After finding that there is nothing wrong with Tazalia, they pack up their stuff and are ready to head home. As they leave the tent, Tazalia's attendants Kay and Rona arrive. After hearing that there was nothing wrong with her health, it seems like there is something the two of them want to inform Glenn about. After arriving home, Saphantite scolds Glenn for staying awake late at night and asks if he is still thinking about what Rona and Kay said. They thought that there might be something wrong with Tazalia except for her massive ego that is hindering her performance during the fight. Saphantite thinks that it might not have anything to do with illness, as everyone has bad days. Nonetheless, Glenn doesn't agree and thinks there must be something wrong. Seeing him worry gives Saphantite the idea to bring some drinks for the two of them. Later, she brings a glass for him, and while having a drink, Glenn realizes what might be wrong with her. He plans to visit Tazalia the next day, which makes Saphantite wrap her tail around Glenn and squeeze him, questioning his decision to visit another girl. The next day, Tazalia loses yet another match, and at this point her losing streak might break a record. After returning to the training room, she tries to train a bit and suddenly Glenn appears along with Kay and Rona. He informs Tazalia that all the other centaurs wear horseshoes while she doesn't. This is the main reason she can't improve no matter how hard she tries. Tazelia tries to reject his proposal, but Kay and Rona restrict her movement while the workers arrive with several scary-looking tools. She tries to struggle at first but eventually gives up, relying on Glenn and his skills. He starts scraping and cutting her hooves, and finally, the blacksmith brings the red-hot horseshoe and sticks it on her hoof. Tazelia notices that they will be hammering nails in her hoof, resulting in her struggling more, but Saphantite handles the situation by wrapping her body and putting her tail in Tazelia's mouth. The next day, she has another match and Glenn gets the best seat in the arena. Saphantite mentions that Dr. Cethel he was not able to notice something as clear as this, which makes Glenn inform her that she doesn't perform anything unless the patient asks her to. Finally, the match starts and Tazelia is able to defeat her opponent with a single strike. Glenn and Saphantite first met when the war between humans and monsters was still going on. She was kept at Glenn's house as a hostage, as Glenn's and Saphantite's father ran an Eastern trading company. Her being a hostage was reassurance that Saphantite's family wouldn't betray the company. After a year, the war finally ended and Saphantite was sent back to her house. She thought that the two of them might never meet again until Glenn got admitted to the Nemia Academy to study monster medicine. Back to the present, Saphantite notices that the clinic is out of purified water and her sun ointment. Later, the two of them went to shop for the products and Saphantite seemed excited as they went out after a long time. Before reaching the market, Glenn warns Saphantite that they won't be buying any unnecessary stuff. Afterward, a merman monster appears and asks for their destination. On their way to the market, Glenn discusses the Marrow waterways and how it was a perfect idea to create something like this. Soon, they reach the shop and purchase purified water. Even though Glenn told her not to, she wants to purchase some things for herself. After a lot of window shopping, she bought a small glass bottle. On their way back home, Glenn notices that there are not many gondolas apart from theirs. The merman informs them that it is due to the mermaid show at night where mermaids sing and dance for the viewers. Saphantite wants to see it, but Glenn pressures her to go back home and watch it some other day. Suddenly, they run into a mermaid that attracts Saphantite's attention by calling the two of them a couple. She introduces herself as Lulala and informs them that she is a mermaid who can sing for them. Glenn starts to closely inspect the little girl, which makes Saphantite cautious about his mindset. To break their argument, Lulala tells them that the bridge above them is known as the Lover's Bridge. It is famous because during the war, a human and a mermaid jumped from it so they could be together forever. Afterward, Glenn gives her some money to hear her sing and tells her that there is enough money for two of her songs even though it is clearly less than the actual amount. Lulala gets a little salty and tells Glenn that her songs are not that cheap, and even Lady Scatty told her that she could sing at the Central Council Hall. However, Glenn clears up the misunderstanding and tells her that he will pay for the other song by examining her. Later, Lulala starts singing but stops midway due to her cough. She tries to sing one more time, but Glenn decides to examine her and tells the merman to take them somewhere private. Afterward, Glenn starts to examine her body and notices inflammation in her throat. The next thing he wants to inspect is the mermaid's talons. She gets creeped out by his sudden request, but he informs her that all he wants to check is her lungs. After finding no problem with her breathing pattern, Glenn notices that her gills are open even though she is currently on land. Later, he starts inspecting her gills and keeps on taking his fingers deeper, making the little girl uncomfortable. He realizes that her gills do not even have mucus, prompting him to ask how long she stays on land per day. Both of them are surprised to hear that she spends 2/3 of the day on land, which is very harmful for mermaids. However, she is forced to do so because her dad never returned after buying milk, causing Lulala's mother and her to work all day long. Their conversation is interrupted by a boy who is about to drown, and her mother can't do anything but seek help from others. Glenn asks the merman to help them, but he refuses, as in his absence their boat might get washed away. Lulala decides to help and manages to take the boy to the surface. While they are busy giving the boy CPR, Lulala loses consciousness and falls into the water. After he is able to treat the boy, they notice that Lulala is missing, which prompts Glenn to dive in the water. Glenn realizes that there have been cases of mermaids drowning in water, which is mostly due to some kind of ailment in their gills. He finally spots Lulala and understands that water might not be coming out of her gills but getting trapped in her lungs. After stopping her from drowning further, the cultured doctor starts giving her mouth-to-mouth where no one can see them. Finally, he is able to clear the way in her body so the water can flow through easily. However, this makes Glenn lose consciousness. Luckily, Saphantite is able to save both of them with her tail and complains about how hard it was to carry both of them. Later, Glenn and Lulala sit close to each other while he examines her further. Saphantite gets angry at Glenn for making moves on the little girl while she is present in front of him. The next day, Lulala performs in the city center while several monsters hear her sing. Glenn and Saphantite are among the viewers and ask how she is feeling after her performance. Lulala informs them that she has been using the moisturizer and cough drops they gave her, which helped heal her inflammation. She seems a little edgy in Glenn's presence, which makes Safentite comment that she must be disturbed after what Glenn pulled underwater. However, Lulala tells Glenn that she is grateful to him for healing her inflammation and later swims away. After she leaves, Glenn contemplates whether she hates him now. Safentite informs him that the two of them are friendlier, which is why she would like Glenn to be on better terms with her. Glenn is treating a monster by giving her a bath with a special bio-liquid that allows the monster to internally regenerate. After saying their goodbyes to the monster, both of them go inside, but suddenly the door knocks. Surprisingly, it is Scatty, who is the council representative of the city. Seeing her visit their clinic surprised them, but she starts talking right away. However, she is so soft-spoken that even Glenn can't make out what she is saying. Luckily, Kunai arrives, who is also Scatty's personal bodyguard. Scatty starts talking and Kunai acts as a mediator. She informs them that Kunai has lost her right arm while battling bandits, and Glenn's job is to find that arm and reattach it. During her fight with more than 10 bandits, Kunai couldn't bring her arm back with her. After understanding their problems, Glenn wants to ask a few questions. He starts off by asking them the reason they chose his clinic instead of going to the central hospital. Kunai informed them that it was their first priority, but Dr. Seathel denied their request and told them to visit her student Glenn instead. The next question he asks is what kind of monster Kunai is. She replies that Kunai is a flesh golem, made from parts of human corpses by a doctor with strange goals. Afterward, as soon as Scatty leaves, Kunai decides that she doesn't need their help and goes off to find her arm herself. Glenn decides to follow her and tells Safentite that even if Kunai hates doctors due to how she was created, it is still his job to take care of his patients. Meanwhile, Kunai runs into the bandit from last night. On the other hand, Glenn starts searching the city and comes across Tazalia, who seems very worried. She shows him Kunai's leg, which was lying on the ground. Subsequently, Kunai rests in an alley and makes up her mind to find her body parts as soon as possible. Suddenly, her intact legs start tickling and giving the tough warrior a hard time. Turns out it is Glenn messing with her amputated leg. He starts touching the leg in a questionable manner, which makes Tazalia judge the doctor as a cultured one. Meanwhile, this is not the only problem Kunai faces. Even her body parts, which are made up of different corpses, resonate within her. After finding her leg, all there is left for Glenn to find is her right arm. Surprisingly, Glenn runs into Lulala during his walk around the town. Lulala informs him that she decided to visit the city to check out the stuff going on with the bandits. She also informs Glenn that there is something she wants to give to him. On the other hand, Kunai's right arm starts tickling, which points towards the fact that the creep doctor got his hands on it. Later, all that is left is to find Kunai so he can reattach the body parts. Lulala gives him the idea to ask the body parts about her location, and fortunately, they are aware. Nonetheless, Kunai has had enough and is about to cry because of what the doctor is doing with her body parts. Suddenly, Glenn appears and informs her that he will begin reattaching her arms. Afterward, he takes out a needle, which allows the user to stitch blood vessels together. Seeing how her old stitches were done with sewing needles, it clearly tells that whoever created her was anything but a doctor. Glenn plans to reattach all her nerves together as well. However, Kunai refuses and tells him that she is a flesh golem and that attaching the muscles together would be more than enough for her. Glenn replies that if they don't correctly attach her body parts, they will never be fully hers and always belong to someone else. This reminds her about the voices she hears and allows him to reattach the nerves. While Glenn is busy doing his job, Kunai tells him that the doctor who made her told Kunai that she is a perfect human as she doesn't feel any suffering. She further included that she doesn't feel any pain, so there is no reason to be so delicate. Glenn rizzes her up by letting her know that she is no less than a human, as someone who is alive is bound to suffer. Now that the right arm is attached, it is time to work on the leg. Meanwhile, Safentite is holding the fort when Arania gives her a visit. She came to the clinic looking for Glenn but seemed disappointed when he was not present. Arania is Safentite's drinking buddy and asks her to bring Glenn along with her the next time she visits the pub. Before leaving, she teases Safentite, asking her whether the doctor is out there flirting with his patients. This statement makes Safentite furious, and she throws a spoon at her. On the other hand, Glenn asks Kunai to lift up her shirt so he can get a better view. He starts working on her leg and the procedure excites the golem, forcing her to make happy noises. It gets so extreme into the point where she starts to tear up, but the Chad doctor couldn't care less. After her treatment is done, she informs Glenn that this is the reason she despises doctors and threatens him that she will surely punish him for humiliating her like this. However, out of respect for Scatty, his punishment is delayed. In the end, she shows her gratitude towards Glenn for treating her and making her body better than it was. Surprisingly, the bandit that targeted Kunai earlier is hiding behind them and witnessing everything that happened. After returning to the clinic, Glenn brings some milk for the little bird helpers. Suddenly, Safentite appears and shows her stomach to Glenn, letting him know that she is expecting a baby. Glenn realizes that Saphentite is making a fool out of him because her species continue their generation without a partner. Afterward, he wants to look at the things that are making her stomach appear fat. Saphentite teases him for asking her to go commando when he only wants to look at her stomach. Later, she finally reveals that she is keeping an egg warm. Her friend found it on the road and decided to take it to Saphentite. Their conversation is interrupted by a group of bandits arriving near the clinic. All of them break into the clinic and Saphentite takes care of the first one. Afterward, they decide to run instead of confronting them. After reaching a safe distance, Saphentite informs Glenn that the bandits most likely saw him with kunai, which made them believe that they are comrades. For now, they plan to go to the Central Council as returning to the clinic seems impossible. Suddenly, kunai appears with a bandit on her shoulders like it's no big deal. She informs the two of them that the bandits have been selling harpies and forcing them to lay eggs. Their eggs are later sold to humans with questionable tastes. Turns out the egg that Saphentite has is of the harpies as well, and the bandits will come after them if they catch on. Suddenly, the bandit she brought wakes up and tries to attack but is sent back to Dreamland once again. Afterward, she tells them that they are unable to provide protection to them because the city warriors are performing a huge operation to expose these people. Kunai tells the two of them to tag along as it will be much safer for them that way. After reaching the waterfront, they run into Lulala. Kunai tells them that she will inform her presence on the way. Surprisingly, Scatty is present on the boat as well. Afterward, she informs them that Scatty made a deal with Lulala that she will be helping out with their missions from time to time if they allow her to perform in the city center. Hearing this fact makes Glenn furious, and he questions Scatty if she is taking advantage of Lulala's poverty. Scatty shamelessly agrees and tells them that as she is always present in the city center, their meeting goes unnoticed by the bandits. Not only that, but she is also handsomely rewarded for her contributions. Lulala interrupts and tells the overprotective doctor that she is no longer a child and is able to make her own decision. Glenn respects her decision and the conversation continues on. Kunai explains that the bandits have a hideout on an old piece of land in the waterways. However, it will end today as this is the sole reason Kunai wanted her limbs to be reattached. Their plan is to use the other soldiers who will charge in from the front as bait while they break into the hideout from the back. Later, a bridge appears in their way which is swarmed with bandit archers. They start shooting the arrows and everyone lies down to avoid getting hit. Just as Kunai is about to charge forward, Tazelia along with Kay and Rona arrives. They decide to take care of the bandits on the bridge, allowing Glenn and the others to make their way towards the hideout without any interruption. While on the bridge, the bandit tells Tazelia that her company can hardly function without war and that is the end goal of bandits. She uses her weapon to dominate the amateur bandits, letting them know that the humans and monsters live peacefully in this city. Finally, Glenn and the others reach their destination and the ringleader of the bandits appears. He tries to whitewash Kunai and tells her that they have no other choice but to get involved in shady business. In reply, she mocks the prideful idiot and the fight commences. While they are fighting, Glenn, Saphentite, and Scatty make their way inside the hideout. A bandit tries to attack them, but Scatty uses her tail to absolutely dominate him. They finally arrive in the room where the harpies are imprisoned. They all are hiding in a corner and look terrified. However, their hearts are filled with some hope when Glenn introduces himself as a doctor. The harpies inform Glenn that one of them is suffering from extreme stomach pain and requests him to examine her. Afterward, he rubs her stomach in a questionable manner to figure out the problem. In the end, Glenn figures out that the pain is because of her egg that is stuck. Afterward, he asks Scatty and Saphentite to take care of the bandits while he treats the patient. The cultured doctor takes off her clothes and starts rubbing her body. Suddenly, the bandits arrive and Saphentite flawlessly takes care of them. While fighting, she contemplates the two things that she has kept a secret from Glenn. The first one is that she has an incurable illness that no one can treat. The other one is that she belongs to a family of assassins. Saphentite's mother ordered her to slay the Litbait family if the negotiation between them failed, but luckily that never happened. During her fight, she starts feeling lightheaded and realizes that one of the bandits has stabbed her with a poison knife. In a few seconds, Saphentite completely loses consciousness. After a while, she finally wakes up and finds herself on a bed. Glenn informs her that the council allowed them to use their rooms. Afterward, he explains that the poisons can be fatal for humans, but that amount has little to no effect on lamias like herself. Glenn further informs her that the bandits have been arrested and the harpies are safe. The one with the stomach pain was also able to successfully lay her egg. Later, Saphentite gathers all the courage she has and tells Glenn that her family works as assassins. To her surprise, Glenn is already aware of it as his father researched in and outs of her family before making a deal with them. He also reveals the fact that the fever she got when living with Glenn was because one of his family servants poisoned her food. That was the first experience he had of treating a patient. Saphentite is surprised after hearing all this and her hormones start to overflow. She restrains the nerdy doctor using her tail and is about to perform the deed with him. Unfortunately, she still hasn't fully recovered from the position, and this saves the doctor from losing the cherry boy status. Later, Dr. Seathulhe asked Glenn and Saphantite to head over to the Harpies village and do some checkups. Coincidentally, Tazelia has some business with the Harpies village head and she offered to take the two of them thanks to her transportation business. Saphantite informs Glenn that Illy, whom he previously treated, was taken back to the village but is unable to fly anymore. Tazelia is the one driving the carriage and claims that she will prove her worth to Glenn and persuade him to marry her. However, Rona and Kay explain that very few people might be interested in a sweaty girl who pushes carriages. On their way to the top, landsliding occurs and Kay gets hurt while trying to ensure that Tazelia remains safe. Glenn takes a look at her injuries and concludes that she might have a sprained leg or a fracture. At the same time, the villagers from Harpy's village arrive and offer to escort them. Glenn requests them to carry Kay to the village while the rest of them travel via carriage. Once they reach the village, the elder arrives and greets them. He informs them that all the preparations for their stay are complete and he will be able to examine her in no time. Afterward, he takes a closer look at her leg and finds out that her leg has been sprained and all she has to do is rest in order to fully recover. Kay seems anxious, but Rona consoles her and reassures her that she will do her best to take care of Tazelia while she takes some time off. Later, Glenn starts examining the Harpies and Saphantite notices that the cultured doctor is smooth with the village lady. After taking care of all the patients for the day, he heads out to explore the village and runs into Rona. She soon realizes that Tazelia went somewhere on her own and left her all alone. Glenn can't seem to hold his curiosity any longer and asks Rona about her relationship with Kay. She informs him that both of them are war orphans. Back in the war days, orphans could take the soldier's route or the attendant's route. Luckily, both of them were taken by the Scythia family as servants. Their conversation is interrupted by Tazelia, who arrives and scolds Rona for getting lost. Later that night, Tazelia visits Glenn's room and rants about how clumsy Rona has been for the past few days. According to her, Rona has been messing up her cooking, her hair, her clothes, and much more. Tazelia further informs that they have been talking to the village elder about employing some of the Harpies and creating an air courier division. However, she is concerned that a useless good-for-nothing girl like her won't be able to go through life when one of her attendants is hurt and the other is acting strangely. Afterward, Tazelia requests Glenn to take a look at Rona and help her with whatever she is going through. Glenn tries to refuse, but she bribes Saphantite with a rare drink, making her agree in mere seconds. Before leaving, she tells them that Kay and Rona are like sisters to her, but that doesn't change the master-servant relationship between them. This creates a gap that makes them hesitant to share everything they want with her, but they still have each other to talk to and share their problems. For this sole reason, she wants Glenn to treat Rona so she doesn't feel lonely anymore. Afterward, even though Glenn realizes that Rona is absent-minded because Kay is hurt, there is nothing he can do to help her out. This situation gives Saphantite an excellent idea, and she suggests that they trap Rona inside and block her way of knowing what is going on outside. On the other hand, Rona starts contemplating the future and whether she will be useless without Kay's help. She thinks about Tazelia getting married to the loser doctor and how long will it take for Kay to finally get better. Fortunately, all her worries go away when Glenn makes her wear a blindfold and disconnects her from the outer world. This makes Rona realize that all she has to do is focus on doing her best being Tazelia's little girl. Later, Glenn has something else in his mind as well. He straps Rona up and starts pulling her from behind. However, the desperate horse girl seems to be enjoying it and wants Glenn to make it even tighter. Saphantite appears and seems to have a questionable expression on her face. Glenn explains to her that he is realigning her bones to help improve her posture. This scenario makes the doctor realize that Rona might have a secret kink and likes being tied up. Later, Tazelia appears and tells Rona that seeing her happy is what makes her happy as well, which is the reason she asked Glenn to help out in any way possible. After the sentimental talk, Glenn pays a visit to Kay and examines her injury. She seems worried seeing Rona's newly formed hobby. However, Rona clears up the misunderstanding and tells Kay that it was Glenn's idea, making her realize that Glenn really is a creep doctor. Subsequently, Kay tells Glenn that she needs to pay him for all the hard work he has put in to treat both of them. Even when Glenn tries to refuse, they insist and bury him in her talents. They reveal how attendants have a right to use the master's belongings and that if he marries Tazelia, they can enjoy him as well. Even after trying their best to make a move on the untainted young lad, he somehow manages to get away. In the end, they cover it up by letting him know that they were just teasing him and were not serious. However, they further add that they will be looking forward to the day when he becomes their master as well. Eventually, Glenn takes off the band-aid as Kay's leg has been fully healed. Now, all that is left is to examine Illy and return back home. Unfortunately, she has been denying seeing Glenn. However, Tazelia informs him that she will allow Glenn to examine her if Tazelia agrees to have a conversation with Illy. Afterward, Glenn along with Tazelia heads towards the cabin Illy has been staying in. She seems to be sitting in a corner and sulking like a weirdo. Illy then allows Glenn to examine her as Tazelia is present in the room as well. He starts off by inspecting her arms and feathers and later starts touching the top of her head. Suddenly, Glenn puts his hands on Illy's arm, which freaks the little girl out. She gets her guard up because of the cultured doctor. However, he later explains that he was trying to check her body temperature. Seeing the doctor act frisky with Illy makes Saphantite mad and she throws Glenn away using her tail. This results in Saphantite and Tazelia getting in a little fight, but it is resolved very quickly. Later, Glenn informs Illy that she is not sick but just molting. This statement makes Illy furious and she refuses to accept reality. Glenn tries to convince her, but she gets violent and tries to attack the wimp. Fortunately, Tazelia bails him out. Illy runs away and Tazelia decides to follow and strike up a conversation with her. Seeing Tazelia makes Illy excited and she starts inquiring about her being a gladiator in the arena. She thinks that the little bird is a fan, but in reality, she wants to become a gladiator like her and win battles similar to how Tazelia does. She tries to warn Illy about what it really means to become a gladiator, but she doesn't listen. This results in Tazelia picking up a stick from the ground and challenging Illy to a battle. Later that day, Tazelia pays Glenn a visit to get treated for the injuries she received from the fight. According to her, he was able to give Illy a hard time, whereas the only damage she did was scratch Tazelia's face. The gladiator seems proud to beat a little girl with no experience and tells Glenn that she was motivated and wanted to beat her because she misbehaved with him. During their fight, Illy told Tazelia that even though the villagers are all nice people, something doesn't feel right and she needs to leave the village. Based on Tazelia's view, she thinks that becoming a gladiator is an excuse to leave the village for Illy, and it will be the same once she becomes a gladiator. Afterward, Tazelia hands over Illy's feather to Glenn as it might help him with the treatment. This gives Glenn an idea and she asks the two of them for assistance. The next day, all three of them are busy finding Illy's feathers throughout the village. After a while, Tazelia brings Glenn a bucket of Illy's feathers and tells him that she only wants to escape reality. However, she is confident that Glenn will be able to help her out with his abilities. Seeing the two of them having a delightful conversation makes Saphantite jealous and she walks away after mocking the simp doctor. Afterward, a villager arrives and informs Glenn that they haven't seen Illy for a long time and she is nowhere to be found. On the other hand, Illy contemplates how she was able to fly anywhere she wanted to, but now it was hard for her to even get down from a tree. After searching for a while, Saphantite spots her and they all move forward to confront her reckless behavior. Tazelia is the first one to arrive and asks Illy to apologize as she has made everyone worried. She bluntly refuses and mocks Glenn, who just arrived. He starts speaking and lets Illy know that she is not suffering from any kind of disease but is molting. Afterward, he shows her the feathers he collected, which creep out the bird. He continues to explain that the feathers he gathered were not as red as her feathers and most of them had different colors mixed in. This small detail is enough for Glenn to figure out the main reason. Meanwhile, Dr. Seatholhe is visited by Scatty, and she asks her the reason Seatholhe didn't give full information about Illy to Glenn. Dr. Seatholhe replied that it wouldn't be fun that way and she wanted to test her students similar to how a quiz is in the academy. On the other hand, Glenn finally lets Illy know that her molting type is very special, where she starts getting adult feathers. According to Glenn, her wings are different from the other harpies because she has phoenix blood flowing in her. Dr. Seatholhe also explains this to Scatty, letting her know that phoenix blood doesn't give her the actual ability. However, it still provides her with a beautiful set of feathers that are admired by everyone. Meanwhile, he finally is able to calm Illy down by informing her about the new type of feathers she will soon receive. Several days later, Illy finally completes her molting and showcases her new beautiful feathers. Glenn asks her the reason Illy is so guarded when he tries to examine her. She replies that it was because he is a freak and saw her lay eggs. Not being able to bear the embarrassment, Illy runs away. Tazelia seems glad that an orphan like Illy was able to find some information about her ancestry. In the end, they realize that there is nowhere else as Illy belongs here in the village with everyone else. She finally takes a flight after so long and surprisingly her feathers felt hot to Glenn. Later, all the harpies are present near the river along with the doctor. He is teaching them the art of brushing their feathers, which will allow them to lead a healthier lifestyle. All the girls jump on the poor doctor after realizing how good it feels. Finally, Glenn has completed all the work and is ready to head back home. Suddenly, Illy arrives through the window and is covered in white liquid. Illy informs them that she was flying through the forest and got covered by it out of nowhere. Glenn seems to doubt this excuse but figures out that the thing covering her is more like thread than liquid. He explains that there are monsters with spider-like lower bodies. It is possible that those monsters left their trail while traveling in the forest. He suggests that Illy take a bath in hot water to get rid of them. Later, 3 more harpies come to Glenn, complaining about the white sticky liquid covering their bodies. This makes him realize that they will need to take care of the cultured spider who is spreading her white liquid all around the forest. During their walk around the forest, Saphantite figures that an arachne has clearly come through the forest. They discuss how arachne are talented creatures who use silk to prepare clothes. Saphantite warns Glenn to be careful as arachne are very good at making traps as well. However, this warning is useless for someone like the dumb doctor as he gets stuck in a trap the next second. Suddenly, an arachne jumps on them in order to inspect the person who fell in her trap. Turns out it is none other than Urania. This is the first time she sees the doctor about whom Saphantite keeps talking about. She introduces herself as Saphantite's best friend. Saphantite further informs Glenn that Urania is the lead designer at Loose Silk Sewing, which is a company that specializes in monster apparel. Afterward, Glenn asks her the reason she is wandering around the forest. Urania replies that she had heard about a harpy with phoenix feathers who lives near the mountains. She wanted to take a look at her feathers and use them as a part of her new design. The reason she put so many traps around the forest was so that she could catch Illy. Afterward, Saphantite lets her know that harpies live in the village and takes her to meet with Illy. Upon seeing her, Urania rapidly closes in which freaks out the wannabe phoenix. On the other hand, Thasalia is training in the forest and witnesses Illy running away from a spider-looking monster. Meanwhile, Saphantite informs Glenn that she made sure to tell Urania to not spread any more webs around the forest. Suddenly, Thasalia arrives and is covered in the same white liquid as well. Saphantite lets her know that it is the work of her best friend, which prompts Thasalia to mock her for having such weirdos as friends. They both start to argue, but this time, Saphantite decides to end it and leave rather than try to win the argument. This makes Thasalia realize that Saphantite must be tired, and Glenn informs her that Lamias like her doesn't handle cold weather very well. At night, Glenn tells Saphantite that Kay and Rona have invited her to the hot springs and advises her to take a break. While Saphantite is chilling in the hot spring, Urania pays the doctor a visit and informs him about her condition. Glenn starts to examine her, and afterward, she decides to take a walk in the forest. Glenn accompanies her so that her condition doesn't get any worse. They walk quite far away from the village and Glenn tries to return back. However, he gets stuck in her trap and Urania informs him that all this was an act as she is feeling perfectly fine. She wanted to lure the doctor out into the forest and have some fun with him. Urania informs Glenn that she is curious about why Saphantite likes the nerd this much. Her logic is that Saphantite will find them out and throw herself on Glenn due to intense jealousy. This somehow will make Urania and Saphantite connected through the doctor. The Riz act is about to commence, but the horsewoman arrives in the nick of time. She frees Glenn from the trap and takes him to a safer distance. Thasalia informs Urania that she will not be staying out of this matter as the doctor and she will be getting married in the future. Urania points out that they both are the same as she is doing this for friendship while Thasalia is doing it as the heir of her business. The whole complicated scenario puts Thasalia in quite a predicament. In the end, Thasalia decides to attack Urania as she had enough of her complex statements. Urania mocks her for being a barbaric woman and trying to attack her out of nowhere. Afterward, Urania decides to take her on and takes the fighting stance. Just as the two of them are about to battle each other, Saphantite arrives and takes Glenn out of the scene. She later yells at the two of them that her precious doctor doesn't have time for love or relationships at the moment. Accidentally, she makes the doctor lose consciousness due to her tight grip. Later that night, the two of them are having a drink in their room and Saphantite keeps on apologizing for what happened. Saphantite's drunken version turns out to be far braver as she confesses her love to Glenn. She continues on explaining the fact that more and more rivals keep on arriving and makes her life harder. Glenn reassures her and lets her know that she is the only one with whom he enjoys having a drink like this. Hearing this cheesy statement makes all the bee workers flee from the room. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking and the two of them go outside to check it out. The village elder is present and he explains there are giants present in the world who once destroyed everything in their paths. Around 300 years ago, the villagers failed to make a sacrificial offering to the giant. The elder is scared that the giant might be furious and wants to destroy their village as a punishment. Soon, the ground shakes and the village starts falling apart. Some of the harpies are unable to fly, which puts their lives in danger. The old geezer can't seem to handle the situation, but Thasalia arrives and takes everything under control. She orders Illy to go and inform Scatty about the situation and asks Urania to use her silk and package everyone's belongings so the harpies can take them away. Later, Urania starts working and the harpies assist her with delivering the belongings. On the other hand, Glenn starts treating as many patients as possible before leaving the village. Suddenly, the ground shakes once more, which makes some of Saphantite's belongings fall, but fortunately she manages to catch them in midair. This makes her realize that the two of them need to leave as soon as possible or they might be in huge trouble. Everyone including Kay and Rona has started evacuating, but Glenn can't seem to find Thasalia. Meanwhile, she is heading towards the forest in order to confront the giant and buy the villagers some time so they can evacuate peacefully. Walking in the forest on her own makes some Riz thoughts appear in her mind. Saphantite, who decided to look for her, catches her making weird faces and mocks her for doing so. Tazelia tries to act brave in front of her, but Saphantite notices her ears trembling in fear. Suddenly, Glenn appears too and she is surprised to see him. He informs her that he can't stand idly when his patient is risking her life and trying to save others. Tazelia replies that this is the exact reason she didn't tell anyone and refuses to go back. Saphantite lets her know that they didn't come to stop her, as the horsey wouldn't have listened to them anyway. The two of them start arguing once again and Glenn interrupts their conversation. He informs them that he plans to have a talk with the giant and persuades it not to trample the village. After seeing how stubborn the short doctor is, Tazelia gives up and agrees to receive their assistance. Saphantite plans to poison the giant with a blade and tells Tazelia to strike when the giant is weak due to the poison. The ground starts shaking again and they realize that there is not much time to waste. After walking for a while, they stumble upon a giant hand emerging through the trees. Afterward, the giant makes an appearance and surprisingly, it is a girl. Glenn tries to act bravely and walks towards her in order to strike up a conversation. He asks her the reason she is angry and requests the giant not to destroy the village. The giant opens her mouth and sneezes at them. Afterward, she starts talking and informs them that her reason for visiting the village is to talk to the doctor. She has heard about a doctor visiting the village and wants to get examined. On the other hand, Illy arrives in the central palace and informs Scatty about the giant. Kunai thinks that Illy is talking a ton of crap, but Scatty seems to have some information about her. She informs her that the giant that lives on the mountain will never hurt anymore. Her name is Dione Nephilim, and there is no need to worry about anything. The next day, everything is back to normal and the villagers are returning back to the village. Dione has also arrived and Glenn is about to examine her. He requests her to open her mouth and almost falls into it. After taking a good look at her mouth, he concludes that Dione is diagnosed with a fever. To his surprise, she has been feeling sick for the last 10 years. It was the same time when Scatty came to visit her. Suddenly, the platform Glenn is standing on starts to shake, which results in him falling down. Luckily, he falls on the giant's talents, which results in a smooth and flawless landing. After showing his gratitude, he starts staring at them without a peck of shame. Fortunately, it is his lucky day and he starts getting buried deeper. After a while, Glenn and Saphantite are able to make medicine for her and she later drinks it. Illy, who is sitting on her head, starts questioning her about the place she lives at. Dione replies that her home is at the summit. She further informs them that the earthquakes were due to her being careful not to squish any animals in the forests while traveling. Meanwhile, Saphantite seems unsure whether the medicine will work on Dione. Glenn reassures her that no matter the size, she still is a monster and it will work perfectly fine. Afterward, the village elder arrives and apologizes for the false tales, as Dione was trying to reach the village the last time as well, but villagers thought that she wanted to eliminate them. Before she leaves, Glenn wants to make sure that she doesn't catch a cold again. Hence, he decides to make some warm clothes for her. Saphantite asks Arania for help, and even though she is excited to make clothes for her, there doesn't seem to be enough materials. Luckily, the villagers start supplying her with their clothes, which eventually gather enough material to create Dione's clothes. Soon after, Arania is able to make some clothes for Dione and she seems to like them very much. She apologizes for putting them through all the trouble and Glenn advises her to stay in the village until she starts feeling better. Now that everything is taken care of, they both can finally head back home. After he returns back home, Illy pays him a visit and delivers a letter from the Central Council. The same night, Glenn invites the horse girl to dinner. They discuss how Tazelia employed Illy and the other villagers to work for her and act as couriers. He starts complimenting her for everything Tazelia did for the villagers. Their sweet talk is disrupted by Saphantite, who decides to stalk the doctor so he doesn't do anything questionable with Tazelia. The two of them get into an argument and Tazelia confronts her for interrupting their date. The next day, Glenn and Saphantite arrive at the destination where Scatty had invited them. After meeting up with them, he thanks them for the invitation and runs into Lulala, who is also present. Surprisingly, Arania is among the mermaids as well. Seeing how the doctor looks confused, Kunai informs him that Arania is famous among the mermaids as she is responsible for making their costumes. Later, the ceremony finally starts and Scatty begins talking to the citizens. However, she soon starts feeling lightheaded and faints in front of everyone. Luckily, everything has settled down and Glenn along with Saphantite is walking around in the central hospital. Saphantite complains that even though the two of them were on the scene at first, they are not allowed to ask for her conditions any further. Glenn replies that her primary physician is Dr. Seathully and they have no obligation to let them know. Afterward, he decides to pay his former teacher, Dr. Seathully, a visit. She invites them inside her room and starts adoring her students. Saphantite gets furious and tries to unwrap Glenn from her tentacles. She mocks Dr. Cthulhi by letting her know that even though she has aged quite a bit, her interest in young men is still the same. As always, Saphantite starts arguing with her as well. Later, she thanked them for taking care of Scatty in her absence as it made her work quite easy. Glenn asks Scatty's condition and she replies that the situation is quite serious. She is diagnosed with something so rare that even she hasn't seen another patient with the same disease. It keeps on spreading through her whole body, and it is a miracle how she doesn't faint like that more often. Dr. Cthulhi looks frustrated as the disease is something even she can't cure that easily. However, she refuses to tell them all the details and asks them to go back to their clinic. Scatty herself is showing no interest in getting better. Some days later, Kunai pays Glenn a visit and verifies the fact that Scatty refuses the need for treatment. Kunai realizes that Dr. Cthulhi and Scatty are old friends, and that is the reason she respects her wishes. However, Kunai wants to repay her for all the kindness Scatty has shown and asks Glenn to treat her even though it goes against her will. After Glenn agrees, Kunai informs them that she will make the arrangements so he can treat Scatty in her bedroom while she is dressed lightly. Hearing this statement startles Saphantite, but she tries to comfort herself and remove all the creep thoughts appearing in her mind. Subsequently, Kunai invites them to the central palace and takes Glenn to Scatty's room. She explains that Glenn will be the only one who can go inside while Saphantite and she will wait outside. After receiving countless threats from Kunai, Glenn finally steps in. Scatty asks him the reason for his arrival and he replies that Kunai had asked him to examine her. Seeing how the doctor came all this way to treat her, Scatty gives him permission and the treatment begins. First of all, Scatty shows him a heart that has appeared on her chest. He starts touching it like a weirdo while she informs him that it is a malignant tumor. It seems to be taking over her body slowly and has already taken over a number of veins. Moreover, Scatty currently has 2 hearts pumping blood in her body due to tumor. She continues her explanation and tells him that dragons who came to Earth were affected by Earth's miasma, which resulted in changes in their physical form. While most of them lost their arms, some of them took on a human-like appearance similar to hers. After he is done touching the tumor, Glenn starts examining the scales on her shoulders. Afterward, Glenn starts rubbing her tail, which makes the little girl make questionable sounds. His next target is her wings, and this time, even Scatty can't take it anymore and the sensation ends up making her cry. This makes Kunai and Saphantite step into the room, and seeing the condition Scatty is in makes both of them silent. Both of them are out for his blood, but Scatty stops them and asks Glenn to leave as she wants to rest. The next day, Glenn pays Dr. Cthulhi a visit. He asks Dr. Cthulhi to assist them with Scatty's surgery, but she refuses. Glenn tries to persuade her by letting her know that her tentacles will be of huge help as they will need several working hands for this surgery to be a success. However, Dr. Cthulhi questions him if he even asked Scatty about it and tells him to come back when she agrees. Nonetheless, the persistent doctor doesn't give up and keeps on nagging her again and again. At one point, she explodes and tells Glenn that she would have already treated her if she could. Afterward, she questions him about why he is going to such great lengths to treat Scatty, especially considering they haven't known each other for very long. In reply, the smooth talker rizzes his teacher by letting her know that his only reason is that Scatty is important to Dr. Cthulhi and she wants to treat her as well. Hearing this statement puts a smile on her face and she starts adoring both of them using her tentacles. After the questionable praising session, Dr. Cthulhi tells Glenn that even if Scatty agrees, there are not enough helping hands for them to perform the operation. Since there is no one in the hospital who can match Glenn's skills, he will need to recruit someone from the outside who is just as capable with his or her hands. This gives Glenn an idea, and he pays Arania a visit to ask for her assistance. However, she instantly refuses and tells them that she might not be able to accomplish such a feat. Arania is scared that if she somehow fails, the townsfolk will eat her alive. Seeing how persistent she is, Saphantite bribes her by letting her know that she will be able to stay at the clinic and wear the same costume she wears. Surprisingly, this is more than enough for her and she instantly accepts the offer. On their way back, Saphantite tells Glenn that Arania was planning to accept the offer from the start, but she was messing with them as she might have some other goals in mind. Now that everything is set, all they have to do is get Scatty's permission and make sure to devise the perfect plan for how they will perform the surgery. The next morning, Kunai greets Scatty and asks her about her condition. Unfortunately, it is the same as ever and there doesn't seem to be any kind of improvement. Afterward, she tries to persuade Scatty to have the surgery, but she refuses and tells Kunai that this is her fate. Meanwhile, Glenn visits the blacksmith factory of the same workers who helped him with Tazalia's horseshoes. He greets Meme, who still seems to be working diligently. She gets scared when Glenn's ugly face suddenly appears in front of her. Glenn tells Meme that he needs to discuss something with her boss. On their way to his room, Meme informs him that she has been struggling with lower back pain, stiff shoulders, and how she always runs into people. Glenn replies that Cyclopes have problems with depth perception due to having only one eye. He asks her to be careful, but she goes on and bumps into someone the next second. This whole situation ends up ripping her clothes, and Glenn gets to see the loincloth she is wearing. However, he receives a slap as a punishment for staring at Mime's back. Afterward, he informs the boss regarding the order they need him to produce. Glenn needs them to make the tools that will be used in Scatty's surgery. Even though he accepts the job, the boss still is unsure whether they can make needles strong enough to penetrate dragon scales. Seeing how untalented he is, the boss puts Mime in charge of making the needles. She tries her best to refuse, but the boss forces it on her. At the clinic, Kunai acts as a model while Arania practices the procedure of stitching on her. Afterward, Kunai informs Glenn regarding Scatty's issue and how she keeps on refusing to undergo the surgery. She further informs them that Scatty has despised the long history of fighting between humans and monsters. As her mission of making a city for both humans and monsters is accomplished, she believes that there is nothing more for her to do in this world. Hearing their conversation makes Arania butt in. She tells them that if they keep on being a nuisance, she will shut them down completely. According to her, the best way is to take a step back and make the approach a little different. Later that day, Dr. Seathil visits the factory along with Glenn to inspect the samples they made. After taking a good look, Dr. Seathil concludes that they will be able to cut through dragon scales and orders them to mass produce them. Glenn notices the needles that Mime is in charge of. The boss informs him that she has been working hard to make sure they come out perfectly. This reminds Glenn how hard Dr. Seathil was on them during their academy days. Without noticing, Glenn starts staring at her, which makes her believe that the doctor has fallen head over heels for his teacher. Some days later, Illy knocks on the window and informs him that Mime has suddenly collapsed. He runs towards the factory and finds Mime lying on the floor. The first thing that the cultured doctor does is rip her clothes off and later asks the workers to take Mime to his clinic. While she is unconscious, Mime contemplates that their factory only used to make weapons in the early days until Scatty came to their factory. She told them that their new purpose would be to make tools that would save lives instead of taking them. This is how they were put in charge of making tools needed by the hospital. Afterward, she wakes up and finds herself on a bed. Glenn informs her of the reason she was brought to his clinic. Subsequently, Mime looks at her clothes and freaks out that the doctor has now seen everything. After she fully recovers, Glenn informs her that the reason she collapsed is because she was a little tipsy. Arania thinks that the little girl had been drinking. However, the reason she was knocked out was because of motion sickness. As Cyclopes only have one eye to begin with, even small movements and spins make it quite stressful for them. Nevertheless, the thing Glenn can't figure out is how she got motion sickness when Mime was in the workshop the whole time. This makes Mime inform them that it was because she pushed herself to make the best product possible. Afterward, all of them visit the workshop to check out the things Mime has been working on. The boss apologizes for pressuring her all the time and joins them to check out the things Mime worked on. She begins her explanation by showing them the spinning wheel she made to straighten the metal used for needles. After the wheel, the machine works on stretching hard steel, which eventually turns it into a wire strong enough to penetrate dragon scales. With this method, their workshop will easily be able to mass produce the needles any day. Later, they all inspect the needles and realize that it is very sturdy despite being this thin. Arania comments that not only these can penetrate but also get into the gaps between the scales. They all praise Mime for making such wonderful products, which results in her laughing in a creepy way. Saphantite figures out that Mime must have got dizzy after staring at the spinning wheel and passed out like a complete idiot. Before leaving, Glenn tells Mime to keep her head high so she doesn't run into things. She replies that it is because of her funny-looking eyebrows that she has to keep her head down. Glenn replies that everyone has different eyebrows and it is nothing to be ashamed of. Hearing him compliment her eyebrows makes Mime blush and she runs away after calling Glenn a freaky doctor. Scatty is finally done with the council meeting and she runs into the annoying doctor on her way back. Back at the clinic, Glenn is still teaching Arania how to perform surgery, while Saphantite is looking at them from afar and getting jealous about how close they are to each other. Later, Glenn remembers that he needs to visit the workshop and leaves the clinic. Arania advises Saphantite that she will be left alone every time if she doesn't get her feelings across and properly tell him the things she wants. Saphantite replies that she was sure that Glenn and she would never meet again, but running into each other at the academy was a turning point. Now all she has to do is wait at the clinic and he eventually comes back, which is more than enough for her. While the doctor is out, Saphantite, Arania, and Tazalia meet up for a girls' night out. Afterward, Tazalia asks Saphantite if the connections she told them about were of any use. Saphantite replies that they were able to acquire a handful of ingredients that were required to make an anesthetic for Scatty's surgery. Later, Tazalia notices how much Arania has been drinking and seems concerned, but Saphantite replies that she will be fine as this is very normal for someone like her. Afterward, Tazalia asks Arania about what she thinks real love is. Arania replies that all she cares about is the give and take of love, as a pink thread tied on the other person's pinkies is a sign that she loves them. Surprisingly, both of them find their pinkies tied up with pink thread, pointing towards the fact that the three of them are best friends. Later that night, Arania tries to steal something from the poor doctor's drawer and Saphantite catches her mid-act. She lets her know that it is possible to ignore all the small pranks she pulls, but something like this is clearly not forgivable. Arania tries to run away, but luckily, Tazelia is waiting for her and the two of them end up blocking her route of escape. After returning back to the clinic, Saphantite tells Arania that she was worried that her old habits might return due to how stressed she has been. Arania agrees that the closer she is to someone, the more she wants to take something away from them. Saphantite reveals the fact that she tests her before as well to see if Saphantite remains her friend or not. Tazelia interrupts and tells Arania that she never doubts their friendship and it is because she has complete trust in them. She continues her explanation and advises Arania that she shouldn't test her bond but try to strengthen it even more. After the whole sentimental talk, Saphantite tests her theory and asks Arania about how she feels in front of the doctor. Arania replies that her chest tightens and her face feels warm but doesn't understand the reason. Both Tazelia and Saphantite figure it out and inform Arania that she has fallen for the loser as well. The next day, Glenn goes to the central palace and runs into the short dragon, who is trying her best to enjoy the view from the top. The gentleman picks her up and she starts explaining to him the reason she doesn't want to have surgery. Scatty starts by telling him that she spent 10 years making this city what it is today, as she never liked wars to begin with. She was a pure dragon once as well, but her continuous interactions with humans made her look like one as well. Even then, she had the chance to return back to heaven and regain her original form, but she decided not to and lived among the humans. Now the city is happy and both humans and monsters need each other to survive. This is what she wished for, and now there is nothing left for her. Glenn realizes that this is the reason she refuses to undergo surgery. In reply, Glenn explains that Dr. Cethulhi is working hard every day to find a cure for her. The monsters at the workshop are giving it their all to make the required instruments, and mermaids have been praying for her recovery every day. He explains that there are so many people who want her to be with them. However, the other excuse she has is that a long life like hers becomes boring very quickly and there is nothing left to enjoy. Glenn fixes this problem as well by advising her to eat new kinds of sweets and snacks, buy jewels, and maybe fall in love as well. After hearing all these options, Scatty makes up her mind to undergo the surgery, and with this all the preparations are complete. Without wasting any time, the surgery starts and Dr. Cethulhi makes a cut in her tumor. During the surgery, Dr. Cethulhi explains that Scatty was originally a fire dragon and could produce flames using her breathing. Afterward, they are done with all the side work and the main job remains. Just as they are about to remove the tumor, her blood level starts rising and the tumor starts glowing. Dr. Cethulhi lets them know that this happens when the dragon's body senses danger and raises its internal body temperature so the dragon can easily produce fire and attack the enemy. The temperature keeps on rising and Dr. Cethulhi asks Saphantite and Arania to step back. Glenn and Dr. Cethulhi still continue on with the surgery. Glenn, being loser, starts getting scared of the rising temperature and Dr. Cethulhi scolds him and forces the wimp to keep going. Dr. Cethulhi orders Glenn to sever it while she is restraining her. The temperature rises to the point that her tentacles start catching fire. But Glenn finally manages to cut the tumor, eventually saving her life. The whole city is gathered around the city center, praying that Scatty comes out healthier and better than she ever was. Eventually, Scatty recovers from her surgery and is about to give a speech to the townsfolk. Due to her surgery, she is now able to speak loudly and communicate with the citizens without needing Kunai's help. Everyone starts cheering her on after the speech is complete. Afterward, she asks Kunai about Glenn and wishes to meet him as soon as possible. Before leaving the ceremony, she informs Kunai that now she will not hold herself back anymore and will do whatever she wants. Meanwhile, Saphantite seems to have caught a fever and is forced to stay in bed. Glenn realizes that it might be his fault for pushing her too hard for Scatty's surgery. However, Glenn notices that the snake woman is not replying to him normally and is trying her best not to talk. This behavior makes him curious and he asks Saphantite to open her mouth. She finally agrees and opens up her mouth. The cultured doctor uses this opportunity and takes his hand inside her mouth. After figuring out that the teeth seem fine, he pulls out her foot-long tongue and starts closely inspecting it. He finds a rash on her tongue and gives her honey as it has antibacterial properties. After treating her, Glenn steps outside the clinic and runs into Scatty, who is trying to get her carriage fixed. Without wasting a second, Scatty gives the doctor a hug and asks him to hang out with her. Surprisingly, she starts calling him Big Brother, which shocks not only Glenn but Kunai as well. She insists on hanging out, but Glenn has to make a house call where a patient is waiting for him. Seeing her weird behavior makes Kunai grab her and tell her that she can hug her if she wants to hug someone. Scatty tells Kunai that it is alright as he is the one who cured her disease while unbuttoning her dress. Everyone around the town is shocked to see Scatty behaving weirdly. Glenn, who does not know what's going on with her, tells Scatty to button up, but she requests him to do it for her. Glenn apologizes for not being able to hang out with her and is about to leave when suddenly, Meme runs into them. After witnessing the situation, she offers to fix their carriage as she already knows the ins and outs of them, considering her father manufactures them. Scatty shows her gratitude to Meme for making the needle that helped her with the surgery and asks Kunai to give both of them their present. The two of them leave after giving them huge barrels of drinks. Even though Meme herself can't drink, she decides to take it back so the workers at the workshop can enjoy it. Glenn is in the same situation as Saphantite and might appreciate him bringing such a huge barrel for her. Suddenly, the good-for-nothing doctor realizes that he has to visit a patient and takes his leave after giving Meme the responsibility of taking care of the barrels. Meanwhile, Arania pays Saphantite a visit and starts taking advantage of her condition. After doing some questionable things, Arania helps her change into different clothing. On the other hand, Dione visits the village again as this time, the Harpies want her help to remove a giant rock. Afterward, the villagers invite her to their upcoming ceremony, which reminds Dione about the food she brought for the village. She goes back and brings a ton of fruits, which is clearly more than enough for the villagers. Meanwhile, Meme has been waiting for ages and finally Glenn returns. He didn't return alone but brought Tazalia with him to help deliver the huge barrels. While Rona takes Meme back to the workshop, Tazalia and Kay are taking Glenn back to the clinic. On their way back, Kay mentions that Glenn is the only one who has the courage to ask Tazalia to transport something for him. However, the horse girl glazes him and is always happy to arrive whenever the doctor calls. Kay interrupts and tells the two of them that they should set a date for engagement. Even though the nerd tries to reject her proposal, she is as persistent as ever and wants to marry him no matter what. Back at the clinic, Saphantite is thinking about what is taking the doctor this long to return from a simple house call. Arania starts feeding her dangerous thoughts and asking her what if the doctor is busy doing Riz things with the mermaid. Similarly, what if that doctor has fallen in love with the tentacle teacher and is having a good time with her while she is suffering on the bed? Their cheesy imagination is interrupted by Illy, who pays them a visit and brings the food that Dione brought to the village. At the same time, Glenn returns and all the Harpies start fawning on him. Saphantite gets jealous and uses her body to get close to the doctor. Afterward, all of them go outside and witness the loads of food displayed on their doorstep. Glenn reveals that he met a lot of his patients on his way back and coincidentally, every single one of them ended up giving him something to eat as a present. Later, Scatty also arrives at the clinic and brings some dragon dumplings for him. Not only she but the Cyclops from the workshop also arrive and bring the barrel so everyone can drink together. Since there is so much food to eat, Saphantite decides to hold a small party where all the friends are invited. Later, Tazalia informs Saphantite and Arania that they have a new rival to look out for, that being none other than Scatty. On the other hand, Scatty and Glenn are having a conversation where she informs him that the world seems different after the surgery. She shows her gratitude to Glenn by calling him a big brother. Saphantite, who heard everything, wraps her tail around the doctor and scolds him for enjoying being called a big brother. Afterward, the drunken Saphantite tries to lick the doctor's cheeks, but Tazalia arrives and stops her in the nick of time. Scatty uses this opportunity and drags Glenn away. They all notice her running away with the doctor and run after her, eventually falling on the little doctor. This was all about the loser doctor and his female assistant. Which one of the girls will be able to steal the doctor's heart? Comment monster below and let us know if you enjoyed Monster Girl Doctor. Subscribe to the channel for more plot-filled recaps.